let's talk about sex. You know, all around the world, at this very moment, people everywhere are having sex. In fact, it's safe to say that most of us, even in this huge auditorium, have had or will have sex at some point in our lives. Okay, chances are the intro made you at least a little bit uncomfortable, even if only subconsciously. Now, in France, the reaction to such open discourse about sex would probably be just a little less tense, and that difference has a lot to do with how we were raised to perceive sex as a subject. So, today I'm going to be talking to you about the foundation of this perception, which is sexual education in France versus here in the States. I'm a French major, so I've been comparing our two cultures since I was about 15 years old, but the relevance of this topic lies in the fact that making connections between how we view sex and how we were first introduced to the topic can give us an idea of how important elementary education can turn out to be during adult life. So the three main discrepancies I want to focus on tonight are the initial age of instruction, the extent of that instruction, and how that instruction has impacted student populations as they mature. So let's get started by talking about how young kids are when they're introduced to sex ed. In France, kids are introduced to sex ed during their very first years of schooling, sometimes even at the preschool level. As inferred in a 2007 issue of Sexologies, which is a French scientific journal about the history of sex ed in France, starting at such a young age helps to answer some of the questions that will emerge from curiosity before kids reach that experimenting age. Here, on the other hand, sex ed usually doesn't appear until around 6th or 7th grade, with students already on their way into adolescence. There aren't many widely available resources for kids wanting to learn before this age, so most American kids get their intro to sex through speculation and through the internet. I'm sure you all know which websites I'm talking about. So, now that we've talked about how young students are when they begin sex ed, let's talk about how much of this sex ed they are receiving. Per France's educational code, public schools are required to give 3 sessions of sex ed per year. Since this code's revision in 2003, as archived on Legifrance, which is a public domain of the French government, the goal of sex ed is now to discuss not only the biological aspects, but the psychological, emotional, social, cultural, and ethical aspects of sex. So here behind me are some examples of popular children's books divided by age group that tackle the subject of sex on that broad of a scale. My personal favorite is there in the middle, Paulo's Journey. He's a cute little sperm cell. I digress. So here, on the other hand, sex ed is not mandated countrywide. So instruction time tends to vary, but it normally concludes in about a week's time. An article posted in December of last year per the National Conference of State Legislatures says that only 23 states require that public schools give sex ed. And as is often optional, instruction tends to be geared towards abstinence-only themes. If it is revisited on the high school level, it tends to be thrown in the mix with general health class and therefore doesn't receive too much detail. So now that we've talked about how much sex ed students are receiving, let's talk about how it's impacted each population in terms of teen pregnancy. According to the World Bank, in 2014, France's teen pregnancy rate was at about 9 births per 1,000 girls between 15 and 19 years old. This rate was on a rise until the implementation of France's current sex ed policies that I mentioned were established back in 2003. But even at that peak in 2002, the rate was only at about 11 births per 1,000 teenage girls. Now here in the States, in 2014, our teen pregnancy rate had reached an all-time low for our country, but at about 23 births per 1,000 teenage girls. That is almost 3 times France's rate. In fact, we have the highest teen birth rate in the industrialized world. Go us. All right, so to wrap up, hopefully now you guys have a better idea, thank you, a better idea of how sex ed works both in France and here in the States, more specifically in terms of initial age of instruction, extent of instruction, and how that instruction has impacted each population. You know, I think it's very important for all countries to take a look at students' futures outside the realm of the standard 4 core subjects, because it becomes a matter of well-being rather than solely intellect. Thank you so much.